when I was talking about announcements, I knew I had something and I forgot. So if, I don't know, 4 or 5 things ago, you said, that's not the song in the bulletin, that's the announcement I forgot. That one was different. You didn't get a new bulletin, well, because Becky's gone and, I don't do bulletins quite as well as she does. Anyway, the scripture reading this morning comes from Luke's Gospel, chapter 17, verses 5 through 10. The apostle said to the Lord, "Increase our faith." And the Lord replied, "If you have faith this size of a mustard seed, you can say to this mulberry tree, 'Be uprooted and planted in the sea,' and it would obey you. Who among you would say to your servant who has just come in from plowing or tending sheep in the field, 'Come here at once and take your place at the table'? Would you not rather say to him, 'Prepare supper for me, put on an apron, and serve me while I eat and drink. Later you may eat and drink'? Do you thank the servant for doing what is commanded? So you also, when you have done all that you ordered to do, say, 'We are worthless. We have done only what ought to have been done.'" Would you please pray with me? And now may the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable to you, O God, our rock and our Redeemer. The story this morning is a strange coming together of not one, not even really two, but of 3 different stories that kind of work together toward their own end. The first that we heard was the story of the mustard seed. It has a parallel in Matthew. Matthew's is a little different. Matthew says if you have the faith of a mustard seed, you will move mountains. Luke changed, maybe Luke's expectations were a little lower, I'm not sure. Luke says you'll move a tree. I'm not saying moving a tree is easy, but it seems like it might be a little easier than a mountain. And so Luke tells his disciples, if you have faith of the mustard seed, you can tell this mulberry tree to be uprooted and moved to the ocean. And it will. The next part of that story that we heard, it's a little more difficult, right? Because it talks about, now I interchange the word servant. In some translations, it uses the word slave. That's hard language. It's difficult language when we sit there and we read about slaves because, well, within our country's history, slavery was brutal. It was oppressive. And so we read something like this about slavery and our minds can go to something completely different. Because those images that we have are immorality, really, of sin itself. I don't want you to get caught up on the word. I want you to instead just listen to what's being said, because I think it's a metaphor to get to a greater point. A further example of what it means to have that faith the disciples are seeking and doing what we're called to do. The third part of this actually comes, well, before anything we read. Sometimes when you read something and it doesn't make a lot of sense, it's okay to back up, to go above. And so all of a sudden we're standing here in the middle of a chapter, we hear the disciples say, "Lord, increase our faith." Well, that's a great call, but why are they saying it? Well, immediately before, in the 4 verses that start chapter 17, we hear this. Jesus said to his disciples, "Occasions for stumbling are bound to come, but woe to anyone by whom they come. It would be better for you if you had a millstone hung around your neck and you were thrown into the sea than for you to cause one of these little ones to stumble." And then he says, "Be on your guard. If another disciple sins, you must rebuke the offender, and if there is repentance, you must forgive. And if that same person sins against you 7 times a day and turns back to you 7 times and says, 'I repent,' you must forgive warning about being a stumbling block. A warning that says it would be better for you to be cast into the ocean with a big rock tied around your neck than for you to mess up somebody else's faith. And then, hey, by the way, when someone messes up and offends you, you've got to forgive them. Not once, not twice. Okay, we know what 7 means, right? It means again and again and again. In other words, you got to do it all the time. I can imagine the disciples looking at Jesus and saying, all the time? Are you kidding me? Every time I have to be willing to do this? Oh, good Lord. Increase my faith. Increase my faith, because this is more than I think I can deal with right now. Increase my faith, because holy cow, I'm going to offend someone. Oh boy. Increase my faith. And the story can go in 2 different directions from there. I think that sometimes we see it as Jesus chastising the disciples, looking at them and saying, "Oh, ye of little faith, if you just had not this much, not even this much, if you had this much faith, this wouldn't be a problem for you." I think we hear that a lot. I think we hear people say that a lot. If you just had this, you could do it. That's for naught. Or we can hear it a different way. A day that to me seems more consistent with the way that people live, or the way that Jesus lived with those around him. I think instead of this, guys, I think it's Jesus saying, "Dear friends, those who I live with, who I eat with, who I spend every day with, those who I love deeply, you already have it. Even if this is all you can muster today, you already have enough faith." Unfortunately, it's the former that we hear too often. Unfortunately, it's the former that fills the theologies of words both in the religious world and in the secular world all around us. This condemning of, you just don't have enough. I'll never forget hearing the story of a young lady who was deaf at a young age, and her parents took her to a faith healer. Took her to see Oral Roberts, one of the original faith healers, right? And they took her to see Oral, and he did whatever he did. You know, Benny Hinn does the slaying of the spirit. Oral Roberts just kind of put his hand on you and said, "You're healed," and she couldn't hear. And so they went back again, and Oral put his hand on her and said, "You're healed," and she couldn't hear. And so they went back again, and Oral said, "If she's not healed this time, it's because you don't have enough faith." And the way you get there is by writing a check. You can make it out to Oral Roberts Ministries, 71st and Lewis, Tulsa, Oklahoma. It's the idea that you just don't have enough. And that's what's holding you back. It's this thing we've heard of before called prosperity gospel. This idea that faith, that having faith, that showing that faith, that living that faith makes everything in the world wonderful for us every day of our lives. And Oral, he was kind of one of the progenitors of that in the 50s. As a matter of fact, he coined the term, "I need a little seed money from you." A little seed money to get this going. Because the way you prove that faith to get what you deserve is by giving to the ministry. Now, I don't need anybody involved in financial ministries to look at me and say, "Stop." So, that's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is this idea that faith will relieve every problem that we face. I'll never forget working with a woman in chaplaincy who had just moved to the South from New York, and she was living through her first Southern summer. And she says, I don't know that I've ever experienced 110 degrees in my life. This is the most miserable thing ever. She said, at 90 degrees, we begin to faint in New York. How do I live? And she said, so I'll tell you what I did. I prayed that God would give me a swimming pool. I did. I prayed that God would give me a swimming pool. And you won't believe what happened. I was walking through garage sales the other day, and there was a swimming pool. And the person said, we don't need this swimming pool, you can just have it. And God gave me a swimming pool. And God gave me a swimming pool. If that's the way faith works, then I can tell you, I've been in some churches, in some horribly destitute parts of a community, who should have everything the world has to offer. Because these are people whose faith moves them to get out of bed against insurmountable odds and moves them forward every day, because that's not how it works. I'm sorry. God is not a genie. You do not rub the side of the prayer and out pops the swimming pool. And when we begin to think of our faith like that, it's no wonder we can say, obviously, I just don't have enough. But when we begin to think like that, I want you to remember some people. Okay? I want you to remember Martin Luther King Jr., who was a very young man and stepped out on faith. Because it was his faith that drove him. It was his faith that led him. His faith that led him through times when people called his house and said, we've planted a bomb in your basement. His faith that led him to walk across a bridge knowing that on the other side they would be beaten to a bloody pulp. His faith that led him to stand up to violence and oppression. It was his faith that led he and so many others to do things that were unimaginable. Did you know that at night he wondered if he had enough to continue? Have you heard of Desmond Tutu? The Archbishop of Lesotho, South Africa, whose faith drove him to stand up against the government of oppression, whose faith led him to lead rallies and marches against apartheid, whose faith had him in jail but kept him going. Have you heard about Mother Teresa? This woman who gave up everything she had, whose faith directed her to help others, who openly admits that the times when her faith was at its lowest point, she continued doing what she did because it led her back. Whose memoirs tell us there were times when I didn't even believe myself. Normal people, not special people. They've become special because of history. They've become special because of what they've done. But normal people who grew up in horrible times, people who grew up and were led by their faith to do amazing things. Normal people in Dresden and East Berlin and Leipzig, who, as they saw their government falling apart, went against the brutality that was threatened and sang hymns and held up candles and walked out and tore down the wall. Normal people who gathered in places like this and stood against it all because of a little faith. People with that faith of a mustard seed, literally changing the landscape of the world around them. And not just thousands of miles away, but changing it in the United States, changing it in Europe, changing it in Africa, changing it in Asia, changing the way that the world looks. Not hundreds of thousands, but one person with just a little bit of faith, who woke up every morning and faces the same crisis that we do. Do I even have enough strength to carry on today? And none of them were heroes before they were called by their faith. There was another hero that I saw at a convenience store the other morning. It was early in the morning because we had to get to DPS. And you know, if you don't get to DPS really early in the morning, you're at DPS all day and late at night. And we got there early in the morning, and there was a woman, several people in front of me as I was standing in line to get my coffee. And she dug through her purse, and she counted out change, and she pushed it across and said, "I need $10 gas." And she walked out to go pump her gas, and the guy behind her in line said to the guy at the register, gave him a 20, and said, "Give her 10 more." And then he walked outside with his $10 bill, and he handed it to her and said, "Let me buy your gas this morning." Just a little bit. Just a little bit of faith calls our friend Ron Robinson at the welcome table in Tulsa, Oklahoma, to distribute 20 tons of food every single month. Not 20 baskets, not 20 pounds, not 200 pounds, 40,000 pounds of food. And there are times when the world around us is scary. There are times when the world around us is scary. Whether you're the man in front of me in line at racetrack paying for someone's gas, or whether you're trying to free an entire group of people, there are times when the world around us is scary. And so we want to hide in our homes, and we want to cry out, "Dear God, increase our faith." And what we're hearing today is it's already there. It never left you. And even on those days, I had a mentor once who said, "I'm asked often if I ever have a crisis of faith." He said, "It's every morning when I wake up and I look in the mirror. I have this crisis of faith, but I hear those words, just this much does amazing things. And so whatever I have will get me moving this morning." That faith is already there. The question we have to answer is, what is it calling you to do? What is it motivating you to do every day of your life? How does your faith urge you forward? Does it call you to lead an entire movement that changes the world as we know it? It doesn't have to. It can be paying for gas. It can be providing food. It can be alleviating suffering in the smallest or biggest ways that you can imagine. We have come together to be a church called on faith to live outside of the walls that we live in. I asked that the rock stay up here this week because, remember, that's the one that's holding us accountable. It's not changing. It's not changing today. It looks just like it did last week. You did screw that. We have been called to come together to be the community of faith that inspires us to take that seat, to recognize that sometimes that's more than enough to do the job that we're called to do, and to step outside of these walls and to do it. As a community, we have that chance in 2 weeks. October 30th. When we come together to step outside of our walls to help the community around us, every day we have the opportunity to do that. When we step outside of our homes, when we get into our cars, when we go to where we're going. And it It begins with this urge inside of us. This urge inside of us to make a difference. It begins when we get down on our knees, and I would, but it'd be hard to get up. It begins when we get down on our knees and we say, oh God, increase our faith. And we're told,